I talked to Tiffany actually this morning, and she sent me a couple of pictures that some might have a little interest in. Hey! She said the weather's finally getting to a place where they're getting to utilize these a little bit. We, as a church, purchased that disc golf basket and another one and a bunch of discs to go with, so that they could take them to the park or around town, set them up, and basically gather attention. And so they are finally getting some use out of them and starting to enjoy. And so that was just kind of a fun thing. What's that? Oh yeah, absolutely. Although I looked at that basket and I started twitching because I would never want to putt at that thing. That's a hard basket to putt at. So, anyway, if anybody else would like to play disc golf, here it was. Yeah, I know, none of them asked. I know, it's kind of weird. Hey, Mom's gonna do the offer.
Don't forget.
All right. Yeah, drop your car on an exit ramp.
Back here, I don't driver's ed.
Okay? Oh. Gravel is not your... Oh, come on. Corners are the best on gravel, right? It's called power slide. Or the ditch, one of the two. Don't... How many of you know how to drive a manual? How many of you love to drive a manual? Manuals are awesome. They are awesome. Absolutely. However, how many of you have ever taught someone else how to drive a manual? I would rather drive it than teach it. Okay? It does depend on the clutch, but it also depends on the student. We won't go there.
The burning smell isn't necessarily bad.
Can be a very important thing. I learned a very valuable lesson about driving. So my claim to fame is I was driving by myself to driver's ed class to learn how to drive by myself. Yeah, I understand that. So what happened was, one morning I woke up and somebody, who will remain nameless besides me, forgot to put my foot area. It was a cute little puddle. Unfortunately, which also contained my driver's ed book. That wasn't great. And so, not that I would ever run late. If you know where my parents live, when you're heading towards Lacona, there happens to be a rock road coming off of the road. So I did not realize that I had gone off the road until I hit the grass. What happened the night before? That creates in the ditch. In which case, you hold onto the steering wheel, and the experience was, don't roll out the window. The lesson was, don't overcorrect. Because when you overcorrect, many times it can cause just as bad, if not worse, consequences than you were in to begin with. Does that make any sense at all? I learned this lesson also with something else. Not sure how many of you back up trailers, because what you end up doing is you go like this back and forth while you're trying to back up and you're going all over. Another lesson that my dad actually did teach me on this was when you have it completely messed up and you try to pull back forward, most of the time they end up in the mess all over again, only faster. Make sure to actually pull forward far enough so that you're not overcorrecting, but you are correcting it enough to get yourself a good run to go back. Does anybody else understand what I'm describing? Okay, you do. it is quite of Christianity. And this morning I want to begin diving in to what kind of separates out Pentecostals versus evangelicals in general. Pentecostals are still evangelicals, but not all evangelicals are Pentecostals. Hopefully you can follow that. So this morning I want to talk about explaining some gifts. And we're going to start off with 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 through 6. It says this: there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them, people want to quit. So order is actually a very good thing. That's where the Holy Spirit comes in. Because in our lives, we can have all kinds of plans, ideas, thoughts, desires, and even opinions. But it is the Holy Spirit that we are to yield to that we don't understand. See, it's easy to trust God in the things that we understand. It really is. But where faith really comes in is trusting Him even when we don't understand. That's where faith really comes in. Maybe believe that very firmly. I believe God wants us to know Him in the situation, having the wisdom to be able to know what do I do? How do I go about this? It's beyond you. It's from God. God is giving you the ability to know how to handle it. Speak facts that are only known because of the Holy Spirit. This is one of those. This is one that to me, this is the one that I think, if we could ask for one, this one would be amazing. Absolutely amazing. And why? In an extremely unique way. So, let's just say, I'll use Phil Ruggles because he's my friend. Okay? Not that the rest of you aren't, but if I've experienced this, it's really cool. It's really fun. It's very God-honoring, but it's also helping another believer or unbeliever. Something that Dennis is like, I can't say that. You want me to say that? And the person's never been in the state of Iowa before. Nobody knows the person, and Dennis walks up and says, hey, I just feel like God's telling me that I need to tell you ... And their eyes go, they're like, I'm not in the message of knowledge. That's the kind of, it's an important question. And the other thing is if you pray for people and they've been healed, like literally in that moment. It's not me. It's Him. And that's one of the big things that a lot of people, I think, miss is, oh yeah, I've got to get the healing. Miraculous powers. This is an interesting one. So here's my explanation for it. That makes sense. Now, does God love His children? Absolutely. Absolutely He does. Would God ever not heal? You won't like my answer? That's up to God. God will do what He sees fit. Period. That is up to Him. And please also understand, I am pecking on the surface. We can have some great discussions tonight. I would absolutely love it if you come tonight with questions and thoughts and disagreements and agreements and all that kind of stuff. I'd love it. Next one. Prophecy. I had found this, I had never heard believer and for the church, as to not get led astray into unproductive, unfruitful, and possibly destructive or outright devastating teachings or beliefs. The distinguishing between spirits is really, really, really important. we need to be able to say, okay, is this pastor saying something that it lines up with the Word? Okay, so we have the Word, but God also is telling us He gives us the Holy Spirit. Very, very helpful. There are many times when it may sound, every time I think about this one, I'm thinking, what's the point? This just seems why? But I tell you what, there are times throughout history where it's been used in ways that we can't imagine. I'll give you one example. In Sarah and I's former church up in Des Moines, Breed Assembly of God, there was a gentleman who would fairly regularly give a message in tongues, and then someone else would interpret it, which we'll get to next. And it was a fairly regular occurrence. And trust God. Now, don't go beyond the Word, right? We need to be very clear that we're sticking to the Word. So, that was a extremely brief overview. I'd love to have questions, but I want to come back to what we started with, and that is overcorrecting versus no correction. See, there's a long period of time in the church where the gifts of the Holy Spirit are not mentioned much at all. Then at the very end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, Pentecostalism took off like a storm, picking up everything. Jason and they're now in Morocco. Why? Because they... The early Pentecostals were also seeing the power of God. They were desperate. It's amazing when people say, well, why don't we see miracles like we used to? Why don't we? I'll give you one word answer. It's called desperation. I don't think we're desperate for a move of God. I don't think we're desperate for God to heal. Desperate to see God. That's just the way it is. That's what happens when things get desperate. People who want comfort get mad at God. The reason why we have 1 Corinthians 12 through 14 is because, much like today, there's a lot of uses of the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which is also one of the reasons I believe a lot of people are so anti-gifts of the Holy Spirit, is because a lot of people have abused them. And they've made them into a spectacle. They've made them into a circus. I am not for that at all. If you can't tell. So Paul was writing in 1 Corinthians, say, well, we're not going to... And by the way, that is something I have never said. I have been accused of it, and that is a lie. I have never said that the gifts of the Holy Spirit or the Spirit are not welcome here. However, I am a very conservative person. In almost every way, I'm really, really conservative. There's a few, maybe not. But things are probably going to be a little bit more reserved here due to me being in leadership. And that is the way it is. However, to say that I have overcorrected could be the case. I think he's making his point. He's not forbidding it, but he's saying, look, if we were to put this on a scale, here's my scale. I'd rather 5 intelligible words versus 10,000. We're not forbidding. Paul doesn't forbid. He's not discounting. In fact, if you read the context of it, he's saying, hey, this is a really big deal. This is a part of Paul's life that is very, very intense. He's like, this is of vital importance to me. And then, of course, if you read other books from Paul, he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ, right? Follow me. Do what I do. Mom and Dad, all together. I got a text when we were out on one of them, and he said, wow, I thought I saw Ragbri for a minute. So we can kind of be considered a mob in a way. Biker gang. There you go. Use it in a positive tone, in a positive way, even within the church. That we can stir one another up. Still being decently and in order, but we can stir one another, encourage one another, build one another up when it comes to the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and be influenced by one another. This is a good thing, not a bad thing. One of the healthy things that we